you for your presence and participation today. We are excited that we're excited that you've decided to join us for this webinar. As Sophia said, my name is Angela Jack, and I am an implementation specialist with the SISEP Center at NERN. I am extremely proud to join our lead presenter today, Sophia Farmer, co-director of the SISEP Center, as she helps us frame conversation today on engaging critical perspectives. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our colleague, Yolanda Perkins, who could not be with us today, but who co-authored the brief you'll hear about today on engaging critical perspectives. She co-authored that with Sophia. For those of you who may be new to our professional learning sessions today, here at the SISEP Center, we support teams across the educational landscape to build the internal capacity of practitioners and staff to effectively use evidence-based practices to improve outcomes. You know how district and school teams are working really hard to improve learner and organizational outcomes by focusing on specific evidence-based practices, but may just need a little bit of support with that. Well, here at the SISEP Center, we support the implementation of instructional and leadership practices that lead to improved outcomes for learners. Today, we are excited to share with you this space and engaging in conversation on why engaging critical perspectives is important to effective implementation, and to show you a tool designed to help you and your team think through a process for engagement. To accomplish this, we have crafted 4 objectives for today. We invite you to take a moment and review them as you think about which one you might particularly lean into today. You may know that traditionally, engagement of others in decision-making has primarily included those unilateral communication methods where leaders are simply providing information to a group. But did you know that being intentional about identifying whose perspective is critically necessary and inviting their voices in the decision-making process is key to strengthening effective implementation to realize desired outcomes? Today, we excitedly create this shared space for the conversation on engaging critical perspectives. So with this in mind, let's go ahead and delve into it. We'd like to get you started with a connector on today. And so we invite you to think about those online reviews. Perhaps you or someone you know may have seen or come across an online review. And we pose this question to you today and ask that you place your information in the chat. I have made a decision based on an online review for travel. Was it about food, clothing, entertainment? Or perhaps you've never made a decision based on an online review. Go ahead and choose the number and place that in the chat. All right, I see some ones, some travel, a 1 through 4. I see several of those, all of the above. All right, several 1 through 4s. All right, more coming in. 5. All right, 1s and 2s. All right, so many of us in this space today have used or made decisions based on an online review. And I, just like you, have made those decisions as well. When you think about what it took to get to that online review, you made some intentional decisions about making your decision based on other people's perspectives relative to their experiences. And today we're going to invite you into that space as we continue this discussion, because in this educational landscape, we see that a challenge that we face here is really about how do we involve multiple perspectives or engage people and really be intentional about that, engaging people and their voices in the decision-making process. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sophia, who's going to lead us in this conscious conversation today. Sophia?
Thank you, Angie. What a great start. So today we're really excited to talk to you about engaging some really critical perspectives and discussing together and pondering really how we can bring these conversations to the folks we work with, the teams that we're on, and how we can get more creative and empowered in our work together. So when we first start, we want to ground you in this idea of moving away from the language of stakeholder, right? Generally, when we refer to the language or the term stakeholder, we refer to individuals or groups with an interest in the implementation process. But we're really becoming more sensitive to the idea that children and families and communities and all of the partners that we have the great fortune of working with have more than just an interest in this. They actually are the solution. They have the answers. So there's a saying that I've always kind of grown up saying in our special education universe, right? Nothing about me without me. So how can we presume to make some key decisions or solve issues facing us in education without a variety of diverse perspectives with us, particularly the ones that know the most, right? Those perspectives really are essential for our effective and equitable decisions that we make. So it's really critical that we understand that the teams we work on, whether they're leadership teams, implementation teams, IEP teams, grade level teams, really need to consider a perspective critical or so essential that we can't and really shouldn't move forward with adopting or implementing or sustaining an initiative when we really need that perspective to have a deep and thorough understanding of the community, and not just current needs and assets, but what about the history? Where have there been in the past concerns or systems of oppression built in that continue to resonate and build today? How does an agency or a group we're working with approach really difficult, sticky, wicked problems, right? And new initiatives? What is that culture? What are the nuances of some of the context that comes into play? So we really need a group to help us understand what that looks like and what that sounds like. We need these extra voices when we need a new viewpoint to really help us generate ideas, right? Generate some ways that we can disrupt the status quo, really. Really dismantle systems of oppression, think about how we can bring down barriers, but also how do we leverage the strengths and creativity and beauty that's the community and people that we work with. We need these critical perspectives when we really need a specific lens or understanding of how the policies we develop and the practices we do or implement work together to really sustain implementation in our work. And we really need these critical voices when we want a better understanding of who's impacted by the work we're doing together, right? How do we know how well what we're trying to implement will fit? Is it even possible? Is it acceptable to the community that we do? And I don't want you to forget that even though it might not be the easiest, how do we invite people into the conversation that not only think a little bit differently than we do, but might even disagree with us, right? So that we can understand why they have that perspective. What is it about what the issue that we're talking about or the decision we have to make that makes their opinion, their perspective different from ours, right? Adam Grant in his book, Think Again, tells us that dose of complexity, right, that really inviting in these other ideas not only gives us more humility and might make us even question our opinions, but it can make us curious enough to discover what we might be missing and how do we go seek it out to understand better. So why are these so important, right? Why are these perspectives so important? Why do we need to understand how well an innovation is going to fit or deeply know our community or our partners? Well, you tell me. Let's get started with just a quick Menti that we can go to. Or please feel free, if you can't get into Menti, to go ahead and put it in the chat. You're welcome to do that as well. But why engage diverse perspectives at all? Love it. Entry points for possible roadblocks. Absolutely. Yep, I'm not the expert in everything, and certainly not always your kiddo, right? Improves research quality. Absolutely. Representation. I see you. I love that. Sometimes just saying that, I see you, I hear you, means so much. What great ideas. Authentic partnerships. Thorough problem solving. Oh, these are great. Rebecca, I'm seeing this go on the website somewhere. Inclusion, representation, belonging. Look at how big those are. So great ideas that are common across us all. Equity, you matter. Love it. So as the Menti starts to slow down, we'll come back to the PowerPoint. Great. Support of lifelong learning, love it in the chat, and genuine curiosity. I love that. I was working with a group of teachers not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about their literacy instruction, and we were asking them what conversations can we have to really spark your curiosity about how your kids are learning, how your kids are engaging with text, and so on. Okay, so we found a lot of the same things that you mentioned, both in the chat and in our Menti. For example, we have found that it gives us greater clarity, right? That teams have really clear definitions of what the community wants, what are those that are beneficiaries of the work we do, what they want. How do we clarify some common language, right, in education? Common language across cultures, and really provides access to schooling and education here. We have found it's a better fit, right? We get a better fit from what we're trying to implement to the context. Empowerment, right? So that lifelong learning you'll see on the screen with our co-learning. So really empowering our partners, our collaborators, to help design solutions, to help work through solutions, but also co-learning. Think how much we can learn together, both for our own professional development, learning about each other, and then trust, right? Trust and relationship building. Belonging is a lot that you mentioned. Ownership. So all the things that you mentioned, both in the Menti and the chat, show up in our work as well. So how do we do this, right? So we recognize that it's really critical to the work we do, but how do we do this? How do we make it happen? Well, not everyone do we need to engage in the exact same way, right? Not everyone is able to engage with us in the exact same way. So when we look at how we want to work together with folks, we want to be very intentional and very mindful of not only what we need as a group, but how we can help others engage with us in ways that are truly meaningful and not just surface. So for example, if you look at the triangle, you'll see that we could go, you can see that we go from the bottom, which might be our lowest level of effort, right? So that's where you see that arrow going up. It requires lower effort from us. Then lower effort from us at the bottom of the screen than we see at the top of the screen. And also we can reach more numbers this way, right? So that's why you see the two arrows going in the different directions. So you'll see at the bottom of the screen, a lot of the times that the work that we do is in schools, right? Tends to get on that inform or consult level, right? So we might do a lot of telling or disseminating or getting the messaging out, right? Or making sure everyone's in the know, right? Nothing wrong with that, right? But we don't want to keep that collaboration, that co-creation, that work we do together at that level, right? That engagement with partners at that level. As we move up the triangle, you'll see that there's some consulting we sometimes do, right? Again, it's not that one is good or bad, right? It's who is most appropriate to consult with or inform versus moving up the triangle. So consulting. So these are when we want them to provide feedback, maybe give us some ideas, but really that role is much more limited, right? We have a specific question, a specific piece of information we're looking for, and then we get a response back, okay? As we move up, we might try to involve more from our community. We might try to involve more families. So there's more of this back and forth dialogue, right? But they're not really a part of the actual decision making, right? They're part of the process that we go through. We might incorporate that voice. We might involve or incorporate that perspective. Again, more of that back and forth conversation, that bi-directional conversation, but the actual end game, if you will, right? Or the decisions, they're not a critical part of. Then we get to collaboration and co-creation, right? When we're able to collaborate with these different perspectives, again, they're part of that two-way engagement. There's a lot of co-learning going on. They do share in the decision making. They do help us come to that final conclusion, that final decision, right? But there might not be the ones that take the lead or are the final decision makers. And that's where we get to co-creation, right? That's the difference in those top two levels, where there's a difference between we're really bringing folks in, we're having these conversations together, they're part of the decision making, but whose voice is prioritized in that final decision towards action, right? Who takes the lead in that? So as we consider, right, the different ways of engaging these different perspectives that we need, what is a structure that we might have or a process that we might be able to follow to put these pieces together? Right? So over here at SISEP, we have revised a tool for engaging these critical perspectives. We've mapped it out in a process, and it is on the website. It looks like there's already, that Amelia has already put some in the chat, and so has Rebecca. And in addition to the tool itself, or the tools that go with this process, there is a brief posted that you guys will get as well that will help just review a lot of the information that we've talked about today. So what does that process look like? How do we put it all together? So there's 4 steps that we want to make sure that we're attending to when we're considering which critical perspectives and how to engage them. The first is we want to identify which perspectives we need, right? And so we can ask ourselves questions like, who can really contribute to this process? Right? Whose voice, whose lens, whose ideas that can really help push our thinking, really make us more creative in the decisions we have moving forward? Who can be affected by it, right? Who has influence, who has authority, right? Who has that policy information that we need to leverage? So we're going to start to think about who is that? And then 2, we're going to be very intentional about mapping not just who, but what type of engagement. Remember, we said we didn't need all of the same level of engagement, right? Otherwise, our teams would be mammoth, right? But there are different levels of engagement that we might need from different folks or different perspectives. And here's the step we often forget. If we want true and authentic engagement, true and authentic, right, participation from our colleagues, we have to analyze 2 things. What are potential barriers and what are potential facilitators for their participation. And we're going to plan all of this out. So to help you do that, with the guidance document, there's actually a template that you can download. So it'll pop up as a Google Doc that you can make a copy of, and we can really spend some intentional time with your team planning out how to engage these critical perspectives. So we're going to walk through it. So you see the first two columns in that chart, right? The first two columns are first about identifying that who. So first we're identifying who in terms of perspective, because we want to make sure we have the perspective, the lens, the information, the ideas before we go putting names to that, if that makes sense. That'll keep us from relying on the teacher that's also a mom, right? That'll keep us relying on the PTO president or the PTA president or the assigned parent liaison, right? We want to make sure we're really intentional about who before we identify real names. So the perspective before the name. So what are some things that we think about? So when we're thinking about who, and again, this is much easier seen on the document links that are in your chat. But when we think about who, we've given you 4 areas to hone in on. That doesn't mean that these are only the only 4 areas, but these are the big 4 areas that we would recommend. So for example, when you think about who you might be making literacy decisions for, SEL decisions for, policy decisions for or with, right? Think about who might be on your team or whose voices are needed related to geography, right? In other words, who on your team, who's participating that lives in the same area, right? Same neighborhood, has been in the area, who lives in the exact same neighborhood, right, as a school, for example. Okay, so that's one potential area that you might look at, or one that we would recommend. The second is who is directly engaged, right? Who either works with the focus population, works with those who are being impacted, works with those that we intend to support or support us, right, in working together. So who is really directly, immediately involved, right? So, and then we ask you to think, okay, not only who is directly involved, but who might have some deep experience with the issue that we're trying to solve, right? Or the critical decisions we're trying to make. So for example, if I'm working with selecting an SEL curriculum, maybe for middle schoolers, who's directly engaged might be a middle school student, right? Might be a student council or student body president. Might be some kiddos that struggle a little bit in school, right? Where we can get their voice, their opinions, their understanding. Sorry, one second, my computer, there we go. But those who have that same issue experience might be a teacher that works with those students. So they're dealing with the impacts of that, of a social emotional curriculum or lack thereof, right? They're dealing with the behaviors and emotional growth and cultivation of our kiddos. And then additionally, we want to make sure we have those that demographically represent the population that we're serving, right? So we want to make sure that we're having conversations about a particular race or gender or population, right? That we have representation on there. Being careful that we don't ask a singular person to be a representative of their race, right? Or their gender identity and so on. That we really make that space safe, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute. So these are the big 4 we would say to consider, but there might be something more specific related to the research or innovation that you're doing that you might want to, as you're starting to plan for this, that you might want to consider and you could add to your map. So for example, maybe this is some research you're doing or a new project you're engaging in. So you might want to have something related to, research experience or a university partner or something like that. But these are the main ones. And then I'm going to be careful, just like we said before, to map each of those perspectives with the level of engagement. Always keeping in mind, right? Always keeping in mind that what is the highest level of engagement for those closest to the issue or concern or problem or celebration we're working together around, right? What is the highest level of engagement for those that are closest related to or most impacted by the issue that we're discussing, okay? Otherwise, we'll get in the same habits that we've always gotten into, right? Kids, parents, families, community partners are more informed or consulted than they are true co-creators or collaborators in our work together. So we said we would talk about analyzing what might be barriers and what might be facilitators. So again, in your chart over here, that's what these orange columns are: potential barriers and facilitators to engagement. And we're going to really have an honest and truthful conversation about what's going to keep them from being our collaborators, from being our co-creators. So like we mentioned, are we asking the one teacher of color to represent his or her entire race, right? Or gender or disability status, right? What about asking family or community members is there a possibility that the acronyms we use in education or the jargon that we use in implementation science or literacy or SEL or social emotional learning, is there a possibility that any of that jargon, right, will make it difficult for them to be fully participatory, right? What about the time and effort that's required or the background knowledge that someone might need to really engage in the conversation? Is language a barrier? Accessibility a barrier? How will we know, right? Who has relationships with folks that can help us figure this out, right? So that we can really invite people in meaningful ways to the conversation. Remember, we talked about earlier how we might even invite folks that disagree with us or have a completely different opinion, right? So has anyone that comes to mind previously demonstrated some resistance or concern about the named issue? And how do we know that? Right. So, for example, are there some that might have concerns about a particular way we might instruct around literacy so that we can have a deeper understanding of what is the concern or what is the barrier and how we can address that? Likewise, we want to have a conversation about what can make that active engagement easier for our collaborators, right? For our co-creators, because we might find some connection with someone else, right? That might help break down a barrier. So how do we really help make that active engagement easier and problem solve what are ways to do that? So for example, maybe there's a parent that has not, or family member that has not had as much success with the school, but they have a deep relationship with someone on the team that could perhaps use that relationship, leverage that relationship to build a bridge to have that family member more participatory, right? More engaged with the work that we're doing. Maybe we need to be really intentional about mentoring a family or mentoring some community partners in processes for decision making that we have, or processes that we have for looking at data, so that we can make sure that they are able to attend and participate well. Are there any other resources that we might need to leverage to make sure that folks can really and truly be fully inclusive? Or included, I should say. So we really take the time going back to the template, going back to the spreadsheet to plan for it. So you can see at the end, not only do we plan for that collaboration, plan for the idea of breaking down barriers and facilitating that engagement, we include some really specific action steps that how, by when, and put a bit of accountability in there, right? Who's responsible for that? And how can we help that person to be responsible or persons, hopefully, to be responsible for helping really help our partners become more deeply engaged with us. So let's try it. Right? Let's try it. Let's practice a little bit with it. So the first is, let's think about a school. We're just going to take a simple example. Let's think about a school. We'll call this Brilliant Minds School, right? And here are the basic demographics of the school, right? They have a concern about literacy in grades 3 through 5. For the past 3 years, the scores on their state assessment has been steadily declining. In particular, Black boys and students with disabilities are disproportionately at risk for failing the state assessment. So the superintendent said, hey, let's form a team, of course. Let's form a team to really examine what this issue might be. And we might find that we even need to select a new curriculum. We don't know, but that's a possibility. So the first step this team does is what? We need to figure out what perspectives are needed. Okay, so what perspectives are needed? So let's say the team got together and they thought about it. So if this were you as part of this team, what might make for you the ideal team? So we're going to go back into the Menti and see what might be the ideal team. So yeah, we're moving into, that team on the left, right? We really want that team on the left to help support this work. But you notice on that team on the left, right? So that they might, that they have a parent, we have a teacher of color, we have a special education teacher, and a reading specialist who lives in the neighborhood. So let's think about that. If that is correct, we'll think about what level of engagement we might want. Maybe, as Lisa suggests, we add a student to that team, right? Or the special education factor, right? So let's say that this is our team, and just think for a minute. We're going to just do this one in chat, or you are certainly welcome to come off mute and share if you would like. Thinking about that team we have, pick a team member. What level of engagement would you like from that team member and why? And just as an example, let's say I do pick the special education teacher. I want them to be involved at that co-creation level because we're really struggling with students with disabilities. So I want them to really help take the lead in some of these decisions and taking action on here. So just take a minute and I invite you to the chat or to unmic. Jennifer, thank you. Sometimes you absolutely cannot start with the ideal. We have to work up to that, right? We've got what we've got for decision making. So how can we call in their perspectives in other ways, right? And build trust and buy-in for the team to get there. Absolutely. Part of the process, starting at exploration. Absolutely. Initial one-on-one to share the scope of the work and determine level of comfort to addressing. Thank you, Lisa. Absolutely. So you guys came up with exactly ones that show up in the literature, right? Holding meetings before or after the workday, childcare, compensation in some way. Exactly. assigning, this is what Lisa was alluding to, right? Maybe it's a one-on-one, it's a mentor to help demystify some of the either academic jargon or processes that we have, right? Or mentoring community members or community partners to make sure they're well equipped with all of the information that they would need. Ideally a parent who has already participated in a group, clear expectations of the roles and functions, absolutely pre-teaching of language. Thank you, Erica. That's exactly right. What we're hoping to get to is when we ask people to be involved at that higher end of engagement or that top of the triangle that we mentioned, right? How do we really prepare and plan for that so that we can be meaningfully engaged and meaningfully and authentically incorporate their voice and ideas and not just check the box, right? The reason why we are asking for their partnership, love it. Why are they so valuable to this conversation? Teachers, oh yes, absolutely. Please don't assume that it's only the parent. This was just one example, but teachers, absolutely, from all grade levels, right? How does that vertical articulation conversation happen? We might be talking about early literacy, but how does a middle school teacher say, you know what, when kids come to me, they're not reading, and what does their voice tell us about what we can discover together, right? Okay. So I wanted to open it up, not that I'll have all the answers. Some of you have great answers in the chat, but you have the brief in the chat, which goes over a lot of the information in a little bit more detail that we covered today. You also have a link to the newly revised tool, as well as the spreadsheet. I just would like to invite you to place any questions in the chat or to unmic and ask a question either way. And if I don't have an answer, I'm sure someone in this group absolutely will.
So I have a question.
Of course.
So if you already have a committee that is working and this is not where you started, what
Correct.
is a good first step to kind of like reset the intention of the committee?
So I can certainly suggest some first steps, but definitely would love some folks in the chat if you also want to put forth some ideas. But one of the first steps that I like to use with teams, and I think someone mentioned it earlier in the chat, is really start to build in some readiness activities for inviting other perspectives. And by that, we mean introducing some conversations about what would it look like, right? What would it mean to us if we could have a better understanding from the teachers in this scenario, right? What could it mean for us or students or whomever, right? So start to lean into some of those, what we call readiness conversations, right? How do we start to build that idea? And then from there, really start to ask the team or ask the group, could we at least pick one way, a non-threatening way for the team to start to build a trust in bringing in those other voices? So for example, is it a community partner or a family member that is more involved in the school or more that they have an experience with that feels safe or trusting to them before we lean into some of the harder conversations, right? With others. Is there a focus group that we could do using some of the appreciative inquiry questions that were answered, that we can at least get that voice and prioritize those opinions? Is there, I tend to want to, in these, when we really want to push teams to move to this more authentic engagement, I really tend to shy away just from a typical, say, survey, right? But try to get them to at least practice either with folks that might feel safer coming into that space, or a focus group where we can go into the space, so that we at least get that practice, that leaning into a different behavior, if you will, than what we might be used to in taking a survey and saying, yeah, we took the survey, or yeah, we even incorporated the ideas from the survey, but that was easier, right? What about other ideas from the chat, or if you want to unmic? Win-win statements, the exercise. Thank you, Lisa. Yes, the win-win statements is a great activity for readiness. Yes. How could the group benefit, and how could we benefit? Love that idea.
Can I just go back to Amy's question? Hi, my name is Nancy and I'm from
Hi.
New Jersey.
Hi,
From the
yes.
department. Hi.
Yes.
Of children and families. I was really struck by Amy's question, because I do think there's lots of teams that are currently, I wouldn't say humming along, I would say bumping along. And I think like these are fantastic tools, but kind of doing a reset with existing groups, teams that maybe aren't humming along right now, how to introduce that, right? I do think, like, is there research to support, like, you know, that, like, really, like, you know, I think it's different when you're starting a new group. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but I think when you're popping in and trying to do some course correcting, I don't know how to make that transition.
Right. And that's where we had the thought around building readiness with that team. That's like you said, bumping along, right? So building readiness. So yes, there's some, we can pull in, yes, we can pull in some, I'm saying yes to Lisa's resonating or making the connection to the concerns-based adoption model. So first, how do we build their awareness? So whether it's the research on family engagement that's out there, or the research on community engagement, whether we're listening to different folks from the organizational or business management lens, like the Adam Grants of the world on Think Again, the Amy Edmondsons on team development and working for teams, whether it's someone like Chris Emden, who really encourages us to blur the lines between school and community, right? So how do we really go from that awareness that things need to change, that maybe we're not getting the results we need, connecting to their professional why, if not their personal why, right? To build that readiness, bring in that information, to trying the one thing, right? To encourage, like we said, to try the one thing that might be safer for that team, the win-win conversation. Yes, somebody's read Street Data and or maybe listened to the podcast from and is referencing Jamila Dugan about radical dreaming, about how school can be different. These conversations can be different. And you're getting some good ideas in the chat. Look at their composition of the team, build it into their schedule of how they work. Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, Kathy had great. It can be, we can be awkward together. Love it. What great ideas. Yes. Oh, the ladder of inference. Yes. Some great suggestions in the chat. Oh, great. Thank you, Rebecca. So the chat recording will also go out in the email. like to make space for another question. We have it. All kinds of resources going in the chat, which takes me to, yes, using an ecological perspective. So we've mentioned the brief. We have, Rebecca just put in the implementation teams if you like to watch, right, one of the videos that we have. I've noticed, I think we have a friend or two in here from Wisconsin that really were very generous in sharing their experiences with us. And so they are recorded on our podcast, episodes 34 and 35. So, and we're anxious to draw them back into the conversation. So we're interested in talking to them more, either for a podcast or additional resources. Putting that plug in there. Right. Oh, Erica, I love that idea. Transparency, that we've been doing some great work. We're getting the job done. We're moving forward. But who else might benefit? And how can we grow even more by cultivating and fostering more diverse perspectives? Another New Jersey friend with the great ideas. So as always, you are welcome to email any of us with additional questions. If there's a resource we can point you to, you can follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. There's my personal one that I spend far less time on than I do the SISEP Center on LinkedIn and Twitter. So please join us in that conversation. A few of the references that we use that could take you deeper into the information are listed at the end of the presentation. So you'll have access to that as well as some links here and there. If you wouldn't mind, please filling out the feedback survey. And we're really interested in doing a longer series of webinars from SISEP about this topic and others. So we would really love your feedback so we can get better and better and have your perspective on either what's needed in the field or how we can get better at serving our community. So thank you so much.